What's up YouTube, this is Paul from Mickey Tech Tips, and today we're going to be installing a virtual machine inside a Vmware workstation. So let's get started. Okay, so a lot of you guys are probably wondering, what is a virtual machine? So basically, I put up a definition from techtarget.com so I can explain it to you and give you the actual definition. So a virtual machine is an operating system that runs an OS, or like an application environment that is installed on software which imitates dedicated hardware. The end user has the same experience on a virtual machine as if they were to have it on a dedicated hardware. So an example of it is emulating. So like if you have like an NES emulator, it emulates it like you're on the actual hardware, and you can even do modifications. So that's basically what a virtual machine does. So like, let's say I wanted to run Windows 7 on top of Windows 10. I could do that with like a program like VMware, or even like VirtualBox, which is a free and open, yeah, I think it's open sourced software, which I'll be doing a video on that one too. And so I can run different ones all the way from like Windows 7 down to like maybe even MS-DOS, like you can see over here. And it's really neat because then you don't have to find the dedicated hardware to run it, because let's face it, some of this older operating systems will not run properly on newer hardware. And especially with the new firmware changes on the newer PCs, going from the old BIOS, no, yeah, it's BIOS, to the EFI firmware, and some having both BIOS and EFI, you you can't run some of these older operating systems that are older than Windows 8 anymore. So this is a perfect replacement. So like, we're going to be learning on how to install a virtual machine. So I guess let's go do that now. Okay, so I will have a printed version of this installation guide. Actually, not a printed version, but a typed up version of this installation guide on Instructables. It's down the link in the description below, so you can read it if you're still stumped after I do this video. So basically what you're going to be doing is you're going to click create a new virtual machine. Then it should pop up with a pop-up asking what type do you want. We want to select custom. And the reason why is because we want to be able to make sure we can have the fastest virtual machine out there. So right now this is set to workstation 12. Leave it right there unless you plan on copying over and running the virtual machine on an older version of VMware Workstation. But I recommend that you just leave it on Workstation 12. And then now it's asking, where is the guest operating system? By the way, it's going to be showing host operating system, guest operating system. Your guest operating system is the operating system you're emulating on a virtual machine, and your host is like your actual operating system that's running it. So like right now, my PC has Windows 10. That is the host operating system because it is what's running my computer, which runs VMware, and that ends up running the guest operating system. So this page is the equivalent to, like, let's say running, what do you call it? Sticking in like a CD or like a USB stick, because a lot of operating systems you can install with a USB now. And so there's two options. If you got a disk drive, you can stick in a disk and use that. Or if you got an ISO, which basically means it's an image of that disk, but it's in a file format, so you can have it on your PC in one file. There's that option too. So I'm gonna drag this over here and click the disk image file, which is also called an ISO, because I don't want you to see all my photos and stuff, because I have a lot of stuff on here. So let's see. And we're going to be using Linux Mint. So I'll drag this back over. So I selected Linux Mint. Now, if this pops up what type of operating system it is, it might do that, because sometimes this isn't always up to date. So now you're going to pick the version of the operating system that you're using. So for example, if you're going to do Windows, you'd pick Windows. This goes up to Windows 8. Oh, they even got Windows 10 on here now. So it goes up to Windows 10 on which operating systems on the Windows side. And like, for example, let's say that you have the software later on down the line and they come off another version of Windows, which supposedly Microsoft isn't, but who knows. Um, let's say you comes down later on down the line and you need to install an OS. Most unlikely, most modern operating systems, though, um, hardware specs for the recommended and the minimum specs in order to run that operating system really hasn't changed since Windows 7. So, for example, if I would have had this before they stuck the Windows 10 option on there, which just recently I guess they did, and I did an update, I honestly don't remember, and then I would select probably, let's just say Windows 8 because it's the version before and it would give me the right hardware specs. And if I and the reason why you want to do that is so you can get the right amount of RAM and stuff all set up. But one thing you don't want to do is, let's say you have Windows 10 on a VM but it wasn't up on this selection yet. You don't want to select Windows XP or anything older than that because it might not run. But as I said, you can even run very old hardware. Look, Windows 3.1, 95, 98. It goes all the way up. And there's even a DOS function similar to 10. Then they got Linux, which that's your open source software. Novell NetWell, which I honestly don't know if anyone runs this anymore because it was like a server operating system that cost a lot of money. Solaris, which is like a similar to Linux. Vmware, ESXi, which is like a host operating system that will allow you to host VMs and then be able to use something like this and plug it in without having to host it and use your computer's resources. And they got other. So like, click other. I can pick MS-DOS, FreeBSD, other, and like this ecom station, which I don't know what that is. So I'm installing Linux Mint. Now, Linux Mint, the one I have is based off of Ubuntu. So I'm going to pick Ubuntu 64-bit. Now, the reason why I want to do that is so I can get the right hardware specs in order to run it because I want to be able to run it. Then you're going to give the virtual machine a name. So I recommend naming it what your virtual machine OS is. So like, let's go Linux VM. And if you got multiple people running them, you could go like pause Linux VM. And actually I want to put Linux Mint VM. Then I'm going to click next. Now it's going to ask me how many processors do I have. I want to remind you guys that it'll select the minimum that it needs to run, and then sometimes you might have to set the recommended. But I want to make this clear. You do not want to set it for more than what the amount of processor cores, or like the amount of RAM you have, or even the amount of hard disk space. You don't want to set that for anything more than what you have, because if so, bad things might happen. You might actually crash your computer. So I'm going to bring up my task manager. Let's see. I'm going to click on performance. And right now I have a dual core Core processor, but with hyper-threading that gives me 4 threads. So I can select 4. And the way you do that is you can do Control-Alt-Delete and click Start Task Manager, or you can right-click on your taskbar and click Show Task Manager, and then click on Performance. Also, if you want to see how many cores you have, click on Logical Processors in order to do that. So I'm going to select 4 cores per processor. Now, the reason why I'm doing that is because this doesn't know that I got hyper-threading on my main OS. So this is fine because it'll just pull away from the processing power that you have. Now, on this machine, I have 4 gigabytes of RAM. One thing that you want to keep in mind is most modern operating systems can use anywhere from 2 to maybe 4 gigabytes of RAM in order to run fine. So, for example, Windows 7, the minimum requirements, 1 gigabyte. Same thing with anything past that. But I would recommend at least assigning 2 gigabytes just so you can have enough to run the machine. But I would also leave at least maybe 2 or 3 gigabytes of RAM free on your system. So, like, for example, if I had an 8 gigabyte of RAM on my PC, which I don't, I actually have 4. I would assign the VM probably 4 gigabytes of RAM. I could assign it 2, but I want it to perform better, so I'm going to assign it 4. And I'm going to leave 4 gigabytes of RAM free. Now, if I need to do more processing power, then maybe I'll assign it 6. But 4 would be fine for most everyday computing tasks. But then let's say I only have 4 gigabytes of RAM like I have. I'm going to assign it 2 gigabytes of RAM. So I'm going to go 2048. Now, that leaves me with 2 gigabytes free for Windows 10, which should be fine because it's not going to be doing anything other than trying to power this. I'd recommend that if you're running a VMware and you only have 4 gigabytes of RAM, don't run anything else. But if you got an 8 gigabyte system, 8 gigabytes plus, then maybe you can run a VM and then do some other stuff. And like even on some of these higher power systems, you could run multiple VMs if you had like 8 to 16 gigabytes of RAM. So the rule of thumb is always leave at least 2 gigabytes of RAM, maybe even 4, open if you can do it. Don't run a VM software if you don't have 4 gigabytes of RAM. So if you have like 3 gigabytes, don't run it. Unless it's an older operating system like Windows 95 or like Windows 98. Then you would be fine because it doesn't even use a gigabyte. It might use half a gig, so it'd be like 512 megabytes. Also, how they do megabytes and stuff, it is in increments of like 8. So like one gigabyte is 10024. So 2 gigabytes would be 2048, stuff like that. So I'm gonna leave that right there. And it even says the maximum recommended is 2984, but I really don't want to go there because I don't want to ping my computer out. Then I'm going to click next. Now it's going to pop up saying what network type do I want. I want to leave it with the NAT option because I want to be able to use the internet on my machine and using the VM because sometimes I might need to look up something on my machine and then also use the internet on my VM. Now this, I recommend that you don't touch the type of I/O controller you have. It says LSI Logic or LSI Logic SAS. Use the recommended one, which would be LSI Logic. Don't mess with it unless it's an older one. And now it's asking what kind of disk do you have. Do you have an IDE or a SCSI or a SATA drive? Now, SCSI is like a SCSI drive is more like for servers. An IDE is going to be your older operating systems, like anything that's probably before Windows XP is going to probably run on IDE. Windows XP was like one of the first operating systems that ran SATA. And so I recommend you use SATA. Now it says use SCSI, but honestly I would use SATA just because I'm used to it and it's what most OSs use. Now it's going to ask you to create a virtual disk, which is the disk that it's going to emulate, and so it can assign space to the VM. Now you can do an existing disk, a physical disk if you're advanced, or a new virtual disk. We're going to do a virtual disk because we want to emulate it. Now this can be tricky. Most modern operating systems use at least maybe about 30 gigabytes of room. Actually, it's like 25. So I'll say if you're not going to be doing much, assign it at least 30 gigabytes. If you're going to be doing more, then maybe 60. But keep in mind, as long as you don't check the allocate all disk space now, you won't lose that space. You will only lose the space for the operating system that's in the VM. So, for example, if I was going to install 7 on a 60 gigabyte VM, I would only lose 25 gigs when I first install the OS, and then as I add it up and fill up the virtual disk, then I would start lose all of that space. So it says that the recommended size is 20 gigabytes. Linux doesn't take much to run, so I'm going to give it about 10 gigabytes. Leave this into multiple files just in case if you ever have to copy the VM off, which I'll cover on how to do that later on. So leave it with multiple files because it makes it easier to move. When you click next, if this looks fine, click next, don't really change it. Then if all this looks fine, you can click next. If you need to change it, click customize, but I recommend just using the back button because you might not understand it. So now we're going to click finished. And now it should be popping up. Now, this is running slower than what it should be because I'm also trying to screen record this too. So let's turn this on. And it's going to load. And as I said, this is going to be slow because I'm trying to run other stuff too. And something like this will pop up, tell it okay. And now it's loading up like a regular PC. And you click inside of it, you can control the VM now. And if you ever need to get out of it, let's say just so you can do something, you can click Control Alt, and you can use your mouse inside of there. You can minimize it, and then you can also bring it back up. And then if you want to make it full screen, you can click View and Full Screen. And then to release the input, Control Alt, and then if you need to do something else, you can click that. Or you can go up to the top, and here's the same controls. So let's say we want to start it now. Okay, and it's going to start installing it. So then you go in and you install it as you would a normal operating system. And one of the things I want to point out, and let's see. You see this? Do not click the I'm finished installing until after you installed it. And the way to get out of that is you push Control Alt and then you click that button. Now for some reason this is acting really slow, and I think it's because I'm using 24% of the processor to record this, but you get the gist. I wish I had another USB port on this computer, and I'd hook up the drive and show you one that I already got set up. Either that or it's like the Linux Mint installation, because there was some problems with it at one point. Okay, there we go. Well, I'm going to be right back. I'm going to try to install this and then come back. Cause this is just taking up a lot of CPU usage, taking up about a fourth of my CPU to screen record this. I really need to get a capture card and a dedicated capture PC. So I'm going to stop this and I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back. Let's turn on the display capture. So there we are. I've installed it. Most modern operating systems will also have support for VMware. So you may or may not get a thing that says install Vmware Tools, and if that pops up, you're just gonna go. It should pop up on the OS after you click the where was it? Well, okay, Control Alt. So after you push the, I guess I pushed it, but after you push the I'm finished installing button, which was down here, it, depending on the OS, it should automatically pop up the VMware Tools, and then you can go through and install it. Most modern operating systems don't really need it because they got support for VMware built in, but some of the older operating systems like Windows 98 and like maybe Windows XP and stuff are gonna need the installer to, what do you call it, have drivers and stuff, and even then it can even get confusing and complex on some of these older operating systems. So if you have problems with it, I bet you can Google the OS, because I'm installing Windows 98 for a video I'm fixing to do. I already said too much, but it took me some digging because Windows 98 just didn't like VMware. But they support even the VMware tools for that, so you can get it up and running. But a lot of stuff you can set up with it, and then you can take and drag and drop stuff into it from your desktop. And then you also have internet access and all sorts of stuff. And so it actually feels like you're running the software for the most part. And so like even the Control Alt that you do sometimes to get out of the virtual machine, you don't really have to do it if it's a newer operating system, because watch, I got input on here, I can go up to that and it releases it. Now if you do need to input into the virtual machine but it doesn't have that seamless integration where I can move back and forth, you can click Control Alt to get out, and then I can go into let's go into exclusive mode and tell it enter, and there we go. It feels like I'm actually running the OS, and so I can push Control Alt. It gets me out of exclusive mode. That's like the that is one of the few things you do have to use Control Alt for, no matter what the operating system is. And they got some other features like I can take a snapshot. So if I'm doing some kind of testing and I break the OS, I have a snapshot of it, and then I can go click Manage, and then and then I go restore it to a different one. And if I want to set it back to when I first had it, I can click this button. What's this one? If I need to send Control-Alt-Delete, I would click this to the machine. I would not send it via trying to do it on my actual system, just because it also pull up the one for my system. This is my power options. I got shutdown, suspend, which I don't recommend using suspend because it can mess some stuff up. Restart, power off, suspend, and reset. Now the power off and reset, only time you should use that if you brick the OS and you need to reset it, you can use it then. But other than that, I recommend that you use the shutdown and restart. And so you can do that, or you can shut it off in the OS. So let's shut it down from the OS. So I'm going to tell it to shut down. And there we go. The OS will shut down. And while it's booting up, you don't have the seamless mouse integration until after it boots up. Also, here's another thing. You see this button which says cycle multiple monitors? You can click it unless it's shutting down, and set it up if you have a multiple monitor setup. With that, there's all these different things you can do. So let's exit out of the full screen, and there we go. We can close out. Oh wait, hold on. Also, here's another one. If you need to add or remove any removable devices, they're down here. So like, I want to go into settings. Oh, never mind, it actually removed it. So you can go down here and remove all sorts of different stuff, and right click it, and then it brings up do you want to use it on power on and all this good stuff. So I'm gonna make sure that's turned off at connect at power on, because I don't want to run the ISO every time I turn on the VM. And then sometimes some operating systems will do that, so you just tell it shut down. And there we go, it shut down. And there we have it. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pause this, and I'm gonna go pull up some of the other stuff on my Windows 7 VM. So I'll be right back. Okay, so here we are. We're inside the virtual machine. It's only using about 427 megabytes of RAM. It's only using 1% of the CPU inside of it. And so that ain't too bad. Now, usually this is full screen, and it is not full screen right now because you can see this at the top. And actually don't know why it's not doing that, but I'm using VMware Player on this other PC of mine that I'm running this Windows 7 VM on, which VMware Player is the free version of VMware Workstation, basically the same concept but less features. And the reason why I'm using that instead of the full VMware Workstation is because I was having some problems with it, so I brought this up because I need to run updates on my VMware installation on this PC, but I'm just too lazy to, so I just brought up VMware Player. And right now we're inside the host operating system, and here's the CPU usage on the host operating system. So right now I'm running Windows 10 on my laptop, but as you can see, it's only hitting about 35%. This is saying 27, then it dips down. Well, this VM is using most of it, so it's actually working out really great. Memory, as I've said that most modern operating systems only use about 2 gigabytes of RAM. I do recommend 4 for the best performance, but right there is how much it's using. It's not using much, but it does use a lot to power it. And I've used virtual machines on systems with like 16 gigabytes of RAM, so I could assign up anywhere from like 4 to 8, and even more than that. And I've had no problems, so it just all depends, because I also have a few older operating systems. So like I have a Windows 98 VM, which you saw that for April Fools. I have a Windows 3.1/DOS VM, and then also on the Linux side of things, I got a Ubuntu VM, and I got the Linux Mint one too, but I mainly use the Ubuntu one. So yeah. Other than that, I think that's about it. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. This is really neat. Virtualization is really good. Eventually I want to have like a dedicated PC where all it's running is like something maybe like Unraid or like Vmware EXI. I forget what exactly it's called, but it's basically a operating system which all it does is host VMs. So then I could have it plug into like VMware and not even have to worry about trying to use up my resources on my actual machine. That would be something neat to have later on. So remember to like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you guys next time.